Hello everybody, my name is Sniping is Fun, and I welcome you all back to my next The 5 list. I'm going to present to all of you here on YouTube. And to keep the ball rolling, I'm going to continue with the recommendation series of lists in the fighting games genre, which we have so far done the Super Nintendo, the N64, the GameCube, and backpedal a little bit on the PlayStation 1. We can continue off of that PlayStation 1 and roll the ball forward again in that direction from the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 2 with the 5 fighting games on the PlayStation 2 that all fighting game fans need to play. And when I did that PlayStation 1 list, I mentioned that the PlayStation 1 was a huge fighting game system. The PlayStation 1 was a big fighting game system. There was a ton of different fighting games that debuted on that system and continued from previous generations. It was huge. There were a ton of fighters on that system, and to come up with 5 for my list was actually pretty freaking hard. Here on the PlayStation 2, it's about the same thing. The PlayStation 2 was a huge fighting game system. It was pretty much of this generation was basically the fighting game system for fighting games. Most of the fighting games were on the PlayStation 2 during the 6th generation. So just like its predecessor, the PlayStation 1, the PlayStation 2 also was a huge fighting game system, and to come up with 5 games that all fighting game fans need to play was a bit of a challenge, but I tried it anyways, and I found the perfect 5 I believe that all fighting game fans need to play. So let's get this started with the 5 fighting games on the PlayStation 2 that every single fighting game fan out there needs to play. And let's start off with the first one, Virtua Fighter 4. Now, if you don't know what the Virtua Fighter franchise is, and I wouldn't honestly blame you if you are a new time fan of gaming and haven't really been around for most of the generations of the last good chunk of years. The Virtua Fighter franchise was Sega's equivalent to the fighting game franchise in comparison to Capcom Street Fighter or Namco's Tekken or so on and so forth. SNK's King of Fighters, stuff like that. It was Sega's fighting game, and it's been around since the arcade days of the 90s, and they did have a version of it on the Sega Genesis and the Saturn and blah blah blah. And pretty much nowadays, the series kind of sadly is dead. I haven't seen the game since I think Virtua Fighter 5 was on the PlayStation 3, and there was an upgrade in X360, and there's an updated version of it, I believe, of 5 as well. But here in my recommendations for you guys on the PlayStation 2, the definitive fighting game of Virtua Fighter, in my opinion, on the PlayStation 2 was Virtua Fighter 4. I know they kind of did an upgrade version of that game. I do recall there being a second one on there. It was like a in between 4 and 5 type thing. But the original, I think, was more of a definitive version of the game. And if you guys don't know exactly what the Virtua Fighter franchise actually is, it's kind of like what they did with Tekken. It's like a fighting game that's not supposed to be like super out there energy blasts and stuff like Street Fighter. It's more, even though Tekken does do crap like that too. It's more of each fighter is from different parts of the world, and they all have their taekwondos and karates and brawling boxers and kickboxers and different martial arts all the characters can fight as. It's more of a realistic style fighting game without the use of, people can shoot energy beams out of their hands or do weird stuff or bears fighting or whatever that. It's more of a down-to-earth fighting game where you pick a person's different style and you take on someone else's different style, and they're from different parts of the world. So it's kind of like I basically mentioned before, a lot of fighting games have that world aspect where competitors from around the world fight each other, like Street Fighter was probably one of the first ones to start that. And it's just a fun, intuitive fighting game. A decent chunk of characters roster coming back from previous Virtua Fighter games, and then they add some new characters. And it was just a well-balanced, a lot of fun characters to play as. If you're looking for a Virtua Fighter to play, I don't know if I would per se say Virtua Fighter 4 is the best one to pick from, but when it comes to the PlayStation 2 Virtua Fighter games, Virtua Fighter 4 is pretty much the definitive choice I would choose for a fighting game on the PlayStation 2. And it was a fun game. I remember playing it. It is kind of, like I said, it's an intuitive, super in-depth game, but it's going to be simplistic. It's a game that's like most fighting games out there. It's easy to pick up, but it's hard to master. And it has a lot of in-depth gameplay to it. But it's still fun if you just want to just play button mash and everything. You might get your butt kicked by computers, but if you're playing with friends and family, you'll have a good old time. And it's probably, in my opinion, one of the best fighting games on the PlayStation 2. And the Virtua Fighter franchise is pretty freaking underrated. Like, it stood the test of time for a while there and then disappeared off, the gaming scene. And while Tekken and Street Fighter and Soul Calibur and all that continue to go around, it's kind of disappeared. Maybe one day we'll get a comeback of it. Maybe if you guys, show interest in it, maybe we'll finally get, a Virtua Fighter 6. It is a fun game. I do just think Sega needs to start getting back into their other franchises. They've been doing Sonic only and pretty much only Sonic for freaking too long. This is a fighting game franchise out there that is worth playing, and it is a fighting game franchise, Sega, that deserves to come back. The second one I'm going to talk about on my list is going to go to Bloody Roar 3. And I basically mentioned Bloody Roar on 2 of my lists so far. The GameCube one with Primal Fury, and the second one on the PlayStation 1 list, Bloody Roar 2. Bloody Roar is a fighting game franchise that more fighting game fans need to play. It is unique and different. Not only, like I said, basically different fighting styles, like I mentioned with Virtual Fighter. A lot of different fighting games out there nowadays, like Tekken and Virtual Fighter and whatnot, have different unique fighting styles, like different types of martial arts and fighting styles that people pretty much would fight from around the world. Different unique styles to fight as, which the Bloody Roar franchise does too. But it also has the aspect of these characters are experimented on, like I mentioned before, and they could turn into anthropomorphic animal creatures like bears, tigers, lions, a cat lady, a chameleon dude. There's elephants and bird people. This is crazy, crazy fun. Every character pretty much has 2 movesets. They're human movesets, which are different, unique styles depending on what their personality is or what kind of fighting style they bring to the table. And then their animal fighting style, which means they're more of an animalistic fighting style, which sometimes does kind of go into what their actual movesets are and their fighting styles are, but then also sometimes takes on the ability of them being able to do stuff that those animals can do, those tigers and chameleons and birds and lizards and whatever. It is a unique fighting game, and it is the PS2 equivalent to what Fatal Fury, Bloody Roar Primal Fury is on the GameCube. Basically, they're like the exact same game, small little difference, like an extra character or something here and there, different modes and stuff like that, but it's pretty much the same fighting game. So if you don't have a GameCube to play, Bloody Roar Primal Fury, and you have a PS2, you could play Bloody Roar 3, and it's pretty much the same exact game with small, slight differences. I think even the PS2 version has 1 extra character, and like I said, there's different modes and everything too. But it is a fighting game series that does deserve to be played, and it is, in my opinion, the definitive fighting games on the PlayStation 2, and you should play it to show some interest in it, so maybe we can finally get the series back again? Because this is like a concept, being able to turn into some kind of animal creature or some sort of extra different form or something like that, where it's like 2 unique styles, which we don't see too much in fighting games nowadays. And I think it was a unique style and unique concept for its time in the late 90s, early 2000s, during the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, GameCube, and all that eras. And it is a franchise that disappeared over the last 10, 15 years that I think needs to be brought back. 3 is going to go to Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3. Not the Tenkaichi series and not the earlier Budokai games. Budokai 3 is namely because it's a straightforward 2D fighting game, like a Street Fighter or Tekken kind of thing, like a one-on-one fighting game, not an open arena type game. I like the Tenkaichi games, and then quite frankly, I think in my opinion, I like the Tenkaichi games more than the Budokai games. But for a straightforward fighting game, and most fighting game fans like probably their straightforward traditional fighters anyways, I would recommend Budokai 3 because it's the best of the Budokai games. It has the most characters from Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT. It has the more intuitive gameplay and, like I said, the larger roster and more modes, I think, to go through, and a lot of content for you to play with your friends and your family, and single-player content. There's a lot of content there. I would probably, alongside this, a double thing, recommend maybe Tenkaichi 2 as well as Budokai 3, because Tenkaichi 2, I think, is a definitive Tenkaichi game. If you want your open world, like open arena, walking around, beating up your opponent type thing, there you go. I like the Tenkaichi games more, so personally, I think from my own personal experience, I'd probably recommend that more. But I think Budokai 3, from a traditional fighting game fan's perspective, would probably be more for your pleasure right there and your experience to play. And it doesn't matter, like I basically mentioned this with different fighting games that based off intellectual properties. I've done, like I talked about Gundam games and whatnot. It doesn't matter if you don't know Dragon Ball Z or not a fan of Dragon Ball Z. If you just like fighting games, I would still recommend it because it has cool characters with unique moves and energy blasts and different fighting styles, a cool unique cast of characters to play as, whether you're picking Budokai 3 or Budokai Tenkaichi 2. And it's just an enjoyable game regardless if you like Dragon Ball Z or not. But if you love Dragon Ball Z, these are pretty much the definitive 2 fighting games on the PlayStation 2 for you to play if you're playing all your Xenoverse games and all the recent games that have come out since the 7th generation. If you want to go back and play an older Dragon Ball Z game, I'd either pick for the PS2, pick either Budokai 3 or Budokai Tenkaichi 2. If you want a more traditional player, you go for Budokai 3. It has a lot of intuitive characters, different movesets, and more in-depth stuff to do. If you want more of a slightly different fighting game, if you don't like your traditional Street Fighters and Mortal Kombats and Tekkens and Soul Caliburs and whatnot, and Virtual Fighters and King of Fighters and whatnot, you don't want a straightforward, down-to-earth fighting game, you pretty much got a more open-world game where it's you versus another opponent. You can move around the arena and just fight and actually kind of feel more like Dragon Ball Z. There you go. And then the last 2, I'm not going to talk about them together, I'm going to separate them, are both SNK fighting games. And I'm going to start off with my fourth game on this list, King of Fighters 11. And there are numerous other King of Fighters games on the PS2. There was like King of Fighters 2001, 2002, 2003, and all these other different King of Fighters games that came out on the PS2. But in my opinion, the definitive King of Fighters game on the PlayStation 2 would go to King of Fighters 11. It has the most characters. It has some characters from the next game I'm going to be talking about on this list too. You can unlock. It has a large cast of characters, probably the largest of all the King of Fighters games. It has the intuitive gameplay like King of Fighters is used to. If you've played King of Fighters before, it's SNK's equivalent to pretty much every other fighting game. And it's the equivalent of all their fighting games, Samurai Showdown and, you know, all that, Samurai Showdown and Fatal Fury, all that mixed together. And it's like their definitive like fighting game they've been doing since like the mid '90s, and on the arcades and the SNK and on their old Neo Geos, and you know the old system that used to be super expensive to buy for, and now you would go play in the arcade. Is like a classic fighting game franchise from SNK. King of Fighters has been around for a long time. It has intuitive gameplay. It's kind of a mix of like a traditional fighting game where the characters have their unique styles, versus also being able to do energy blasts and be able to do different attacks and spiritual and weird and energy, you know, stuff that's you see more like in a Tekken or a Street Fighter especially. Like it's a mix of two styles, but it's a very intuitive gameplay system that, in my opinion, works. And there's a lot of fun characters to play as, and it's probably the largest cast of characters from any King of Fighters, and that's when I pick. It's a definitive choice. I think it's the most popular choice too. Looking up games for this list, in my opinion, I think I've seen that King of Fighters 11 is the most popular King of Fighters on the PS2 as well, compared to everything else. You can play all the other ones too, but in my opinion, if you want the definitive choice and only want to play one King of Fighters on the PlayStation 2, it's King of Fighters 11. And my fifth one is another SNK fighting game, and that's Neo Geo Battle Coliseum, which is basically the same type of game. And if you know King of Fighters is like a 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 like team-based fighting game. You have to eliminate the entire other team. This is a 2-on-2 fighting game where you pick characters from King of Fighters, and it's not just King of Fighters, but from the entire lineup of, you know, SNK franchises. You got Fatal Fury, King of Fighters, Metal Slug, Athena, World Heroes, Samurai Showdown, The Art of Fighting, The Last Blade. All these different SNK games, they just throw into a fighting game like King of Fighters 11. If you want to just play as the straightforward fighting game characters, that's King of Fighters right there. That's basically all their Samurai Showdowns and their Fatal Furies. But Neo Geo Battle Coliseum took from franchises like Metal Slug. You can play as Marco from Metal Slug. You can play as Athena from Athena. You can play as all these different characters from SNK games that were not fighting based, but they threw them into a fighting game anyways. In my opinion, I'd say King of Fighters is more a straightforward fighting game. It's just King of Fighters. It has nostalgia there. It's seriously been around long enough. But Neo Geo Battle Coliseum, in my opinion, is I think a little more fun because I think the roster is a bit more varied. It has the same intuitive, like in-depth gameplay. It's simple to get used to, but hard to master. It's a fun game. In my opinion, it deserves to be played more. And I don't know how many people even played Neo Geo Battle Coliseum compared to like all the old, like, you know, all the King of Fighters and Fatal Fury games, and especially nowadays Street Fighters and Tekkens and everything. And that is basically why I would recommend it. It's just has a really fun character roster to play. If you love the King of Fighters rosters, you're going to love this, especially if you love SNK games, especially if you've even played some SNK games, because a lot of these are like older SNK games that still are technically around to this day. But yeah, that's my the 5 PlayStation 2 fighting games that every fighting game fan needs to play. Bloody Roar 3, Virtual Fighter 4, Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 / Tenkaichi 2. I did add that last minute on my list. I just picked Budokai 3 because it's a more traditional fighting game. King of Fighters 11 and Neo Geo Battle Coliseum. And 2 of those are from SNK, so you should know that they are fun and real well put together fighting games from SNK. I'd say maybe a couple, you know, honorable mentions might go to Guilty Gear Double X or War of the Monsters, Def Jam Fight for New York, other Dragon Ball Z games or Tekken or Soul Calibur or whatever. I didn't mention at the beginning of this video, but I've done this for numerous lists. I didn't pick all the main Street Fighter or Tekkens or anything because I want to do a list of stuff that people wouldn't automatically gravitate to if they want to go for fighting games. So that's about it. Hope you guys like this list. Put in the comment section what you think. Have you guys played any of these 5/6 fighting games? Were you playing fighting games on the PlayStation 2? Did you love the fighting games on the PlayStation 2? Put in the comments, guys, what you think. And what fighting games out there for the PlayStation 2 would you all recommend for people to play? My name is Thanks Fun, and see you all later.